Charlie, g'day. What was it like listening to those guys, those astronauts who've only just splashed down in the last 12 hours or so?
Oh, well, the greatest thing is how trivial and mundane it all sounds when everything goes well. No accidents, no problems, and that's exactly what you want from a space landing like that. One thing that's really interesting now is this is commercial space flight, and that means that I guess if you were a Boeing engineer, which is the main competitor for SpaceX, you're not going to be getting much sleep until you too can do the same thing that SpaceX just did. That is, launch a rocket to the space station, carrying 2 astronauts, and then bringing them back safely. That's exactly what Boeing and SpaceX have been competing for, and competing with each other for the past almost a decade now. And so now SpaceX has got the one hand up, and I guess I'm not sure when Boeing will do the same thing. Maybe in a year, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah. And so what does this mean for the future of space travel now?
Well, what it means is that for the first time we have commercial actors, not government actors. And that means the competition, the efficiency that comes from competition can now work. I mean, so as I said before, SpaceX and Boeing are now competing head to head, and NASA is sitting there and saying, "Okay, I'll pay you to do this. I'll pay you to do this." But Boeing and SpaceX are the ones that are trying to, how can I make this better? How can I make that better? And that, I think, is really the future, particularly of low Earth orbit. I mean, what we're talking about is going to the International Space Station, and that's in low Earth orbit. Going to the moon probably will, I don't know, probably be maybe NASA and the SpaceX together. And also there's the Chinese who want to go do a space station, not a space station, but a colony on the moon. I mean, this race is on now, and we'll see. I bet within 5 years something's going to be on the moon, and we're going to be planting flags. And I don't know. It's an interesting and exciting time. A lot of astronomy, a lot of good science can be done from the moon too. In the space station, they're doing some things with biological testing, but good astronomy, and I'm an astronomer, so I'm more interested in the astronomy, that can be done from the backside of the moon, for example.
Okay. And do you have any reservation? You talk about the benefits of commercial operators getting into this now. Do you have any reservations about that as well?
No, I don't. I mean, you could say, they're going to cut corners and then there's going to be some accidents, but they've already had the accidents. Usually in the beginning of any space program, the accidents are in the beginning, and then gradually you learn how to do that. I guess that would not necessarily be the case for the space shuttle, because that was a mature program when they still had problems. So reservations is it's still a dangerous business, putting all that fuel into a rocket and sitting on top of it, particularly in the landing and particularly when they're coming back with all that heat coming from the re-entry.
Yeah. And so can much more be learned? You mentioned astronomy can be done from the moon, but can much more be learned from these type of trips, or is much of the focus on what can be done beyond there in places like Mars?
Well, both. I think they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, we have to, as you can see, more and more spacecraft are being launched into low Earth orbit, and we're getting all kinds of pictures. For example, you have Google Earth I was looking at my house yesterday and say, hey, what car was that in my driveway? So there are more and more cars, particularly space. They have these CubeSats, right? And so Australia also now has a space agency, and CubeSats are going to be a big business, all monitoring crops and all, monitoring fires, for example, but also exploring the moon, going further. And that's what I'm most excited about, because I'm a cosmologist and an astrophysicist, and we want to find out more about the origin of the universe, for example, and the origin of life on Earth. Maybe we'll find the origin of life on Earth on the moon, because 4 billion years ago, there were impacts on the Earth spewing out all the stuff into space, and some of that landed on the moon and has been preserved. So the moon is kind of like the attic of the early Earth, and we're going to rummage through our attic as soon as we get a lot of robots and people on the moon looking for the detritus from 4 billion years ago and the things that happened on Earth, i.e. the origin of life.
And just briefly, how is Australia positioned to get a piece of this action now with this investment we've heard of in the last 12 months or so in space experiments?
Well, Australia now has its first space agency, and what that does is it's a national coordination for allowing Australian corporations to produce satellites and then get them tested. And then before it's kind of like a divide and conquer. The Australian corporations had to speak each one for themselves. Now there's a coordinating central location, and Mount Stromlo, for example, has this test facility, and lots of CubeSats are going there, getting tested for outer space, and then they get launched. They will get launched in various ways. It could be either with NASA or with Japan or with some of these new companies that are coming up.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Charley Lineweaver, always great to talk to you. Cheers.
All right.